Ladies and gentlemen, let's take a look at the Prot warrior coming into the Shadowlands. The first thing, we have a really good ability that comes with the Kyrians from Bastion, and that is the Spear of Bastion. Blizzard was so enamored with this ability, it was actually in their preview of what the zone abilities would look like. You hurl a spear into the ground, it's going to deal a lot of damage, and it also snares them like Ursula's Vortex, meaning they can't get out of it until it expires. Now, even if you don't want that, which you probably do on the Prot Warrior, actually, we'll get to that in a moment, it does an extreme amount of damage. And combine that with the uses of Ravager and also Thunderclapping, which has gotten less relevant coming into the Shadowlands, you were able to put out a massive, massive amount of AoE damage. Now, what we've seen with the Prot Warrior coming into Shadowlands is the shifting and moving of some talents and a little bit of reduction in certain powers, like Thunderclap, in order to... It seems to me like they want it to be less potent in Mythic Plus. It has become so dominant over the last expansion that they're probably trying to shift that around. I feel they've gone too far. This was easily the weakest tank I played, even though it was the strongest geared, which really highlights the situation with it. I've done a few tanks now, and the Prot Warrior was one where I was actually seemingly fighting against the class to stay alive in regular occasions, suddenly spiking and having to deal with that. And a part of that is that they've moved things around in terms of, like, Demoralizing Shout still being on the global cooldown despite it just being a debuff. I don't feel that is necessary, and you just feel like you're kind of wrestling. I do physically feel like I'm wrestling with the class for control sometimes. Now, speaking of control, this isn't going to be that relevant to experienced groups. They're going to be dealing with it fine. But for the casual player's perspective who does some pug tanking, the lack of mob control that the Prot Warrior has in comparison to some of the other tanks right now is actually coming a little bit comical. We have Shockwave, and if you decide to go Kyrian, you do have Spear of Destiny, Spear of Destiny, the Bastion Spear. Now, that's it. And I've got to say, like, after playing DK, after playing Vengeance, after playing Guardian especially, Guardian's choices, it really starts to highlight just how much less control you have. You could bounce around and you could Thunderclap and hit things, but actually gathering mobs into a nice death ball is way more awkward with the Prot Warrior, and it was stood out to me so much, especially when, again, put side by side with something like a Prot Paladin, especially with their mixed ability and the Avenger's Shield and their zone ability. So what we have here is a warrior that feels less, like the lack of Azerite traits, the shifting and moving of talents, just little tweaks here and there, which decidedly feels to me like they've made it weaker. It certainly wasn't a tank that I was like, after playing it, I want to go back to. For most people, it'll feel kind of the same. There's a little bit more push towards Revenge now over Thunderclap to do cleave. We do have the bringing in of abilities from other specs of the warrior, notably Whirlwind. Whirlwind is here, but I don't really know why. It's very expensive. It's like 30 rage. It doesn't do as much damage as you get out of doing Revenges, which is cheaper anyway, even if it's not buffed. And it just feels odd. It feels like they didn't really know what to pass back. Because, of course, Arms and Fury did gain like Spell Reflect and Ignore Pain and things like that. Yet, what did the Prot Warrior gain out of all this? Not much, really, not much. They did get Execute, which I'm sure many, many of you are happy with, is to see Execute back in. And it is great, although obviously it's a rage cost. So if you're struggling to stay alive, which changes with gear, obviously, then you're not going to be throwing that many Executes out. We certainly don't have the Vengeance buff like we had in Mr. Pandaria to put out those ludicrous Executes at the end. But it is very nice to finish off mobs as you move on to the next pack.